This week, the Florida Board of Education takes the lead in a feud over gender dysphoria in public school. Missouri's auditor delivers on a promise to look at the spending of the state's public schools. And in Vermont, can your Christian faith preclude you from serving as a foster parent? These stories and much more coming up this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capital, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. Now, let's meet our panel. Some of the folks behind the stories you read at readlion.com. Josh Mann is managing editor. Michael Ryan is our executive editor, and Liam Siegler is a Herzog Foundation ambassador and Lion contributor. Welcome, gentlemen, all.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We start this week with Miss Rachel, somebody I did not know much about, Josh, but you said that your kids do.
Yeah, Miss Rachel is a sensation on YouTube. She produces content for mostly toddlers, how to, learn letters, sounds, count to 10, these kinds of things, songs, kids' songs.
Little kids, then.
Little kids, mostly 1, 2, 3-year-olds. But she's stirred some controversy most recently because she released a gay pride-themed video on her Instagram, basically encouraging kids to be who they are. She's wearing a rainbow shirt as she does it, and the controversy, of course, is that a lot of parents disagree with this ideology and feel that, well, this isn't appropriate for somebody who primarily teaches the littlest kids, to be sharing these kinds of views publicly.
Yeah, this is just every time I think this story goes as far as it can go, Michael, how young is too young? I mean, when are we going to cut off this discussion about gender with kids?
Yeah, well, welcome to the red light district of Sesame Street.
Yeah, I guess.
It reminds me of a cartoon I saw a few years ago. 2 dogs at a computer. One dog says to the other, "Now remember, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog." And that's a reminder to parents. I mean, there's no vetting really on the internet. And to people who might stop watching her because of this, she says, quote, "No worries and much love your way." Now, that's the sweetest little middle finger you'll ever see, isn't it? Yeah. Does aggressiveness get ever more passive than that?
Yeah.
And then, gone the days of Mr. Rogers. I mean, never. We're never going to get back there. But, she also had Dylan Mulvaney on for these toddlers. Now, this is someone who was bounced from beer ads.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't understand that. What's next? Is it RuPaul for Rugrats?
Liam, is this a mission of sorts? Is this like a purposeful indoctrination, or is this just somebody who thinks they're doing a kind thing? I mean, what's behind this, do you think?
Well, it's definitely indoctrination. I think a key word is ideology. And LGBTQ is a sexual ideology. All of those labels are pertaining to ways of viewing yourself in relation to other people sexually or in relation to your own gender ideology. And kind of why this is so problematic is like we're not saying that we shouldn't have these conversations with people who are older, but we're talking about kids who are like 3 to 8 years old. And we don't want them to think of themselves in a sexual way. We don't want them to doubt their gender or go on some gender identity exploration at the age of 5, because that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I think there are probably lots of reasons why people are advancing this type of agenda. One of them might just be very fundamentally, it's a different way of thinking about the human being.
Yeah.
Well, whether it's well-intended or not, I think parents need to be aware of what their children are being exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I mean, armchair quarterbacking here, or I guess armchair therapist, but, little kids do all kinds of things when they're little, and it seems to me that this is a manipulation. Little kids will dress up in all kinds of different costumes and things when they're little and innocent and they don't know any different. And someone like this children's host, I think, can do something really devious when something very innocent is at play.
And I think that's the concern. And there has been some hints at this kind of thing already with Miss Rachel. She's got one of the performers she has on named Jules is apparently non-binary. And on Miss Rachel's website, I wasn't aware of this, but on the About page, it explains that this performer uses they/them pronouns. And so a concerned mother actually made a TikTok video expressing concerns about this, and she got so much hate that she took it down, but that's kind of come back to the surface again. And then, as Michael said, Miss Rachel was part of a live stream that Mulvaney did, the transgender woman who is a biological male who, became famous for a Bud Light ad. She was part of a live stream, and in one of the comments invited Mulvaney to come on to the show and said, we should have you on Songs for Littles. Mm-hmm. So the question is, why?
Yes.
Why even go there if you're not actually trying to influence kids in this way? And it seems pretty clear that some people, I think that they should.
Does this, as a parent of a child who you said has watched her content before, I guess now is Miss Rachel done at your house?
Yeah, I don't see how, because I'd say the important thing for a parent is you have to be aware of what your children are watching. Don't let the phone babysit your kids. And so if I think that happens with a lot of people, and it's a really scary thing. There's so much content out there that parents have to vet this stuff. And so, yeah, at my house, there no more Miss Rachel. There's a lot of alternatives, and there's a lot of other ways to teach your kids how to say simple words and teach them songs.
Michael, you raised children, but that was prior to cell phones and all this content garbage. Were you mindful of this sort of stuff then?
Well, I wouldn't say I raised them, Chris, but yeah, you have to be. And I'm so glad that we did it before this really went off the rails, because it has gone off the rails. But I've always said, letting your kids loose on the internet is like dropping them off in downtown Paris at midnight.
Yeah.
It's just reckless.
Yeah, just asking for trouble. We pivot now to Utah, one of those states with universal school choice, but teachers' unions out there tried to tackle it legally. Didn't go so well, Michael.
No, apparently not. So you're talking about the Utah Universal School Choice Program,
That's
right?
right.
Well, it's interesting that they're suing, the teachers' unions suing to stop this. You compare that with the private schools that sued to reopen schools during COVID. Different lawsuits, but totally different aims. And the suit by the teachers' union conflates public education with education. Public schools and education are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And you do have choice. You have choice in almost everything that matters today. We don't tell people with government food stamps where to buy their food. And so having choice in education is a good thing. And it actually, studies have shown that school choice makes public schools better.
Josh, your story says legal experts that have looked at this lawsuit says it really doesn't have much merit. Pretty weak case.
Yeah, so they're trying to say that they're looking at the state constitution, which mandates that public education be free, that it's funded in a certain way. And so I think behind the argument is this idea that, well, if you give scholarships out to kids who could possibly go to something other than a public school, then somehow you're violating the Constitution. But legal experts are saying it's a big stretch. Also, there's a special needs program that is also an ESA, and the lawsuit kind of ignores that and acts like it's fine, according to legal experts. So it seems like there's a double-edged sword. Maybe they didn't want to tiptoe into special needs because they think that they'll have a losing argument there. So there's just some inconsistencies, but what we're seeing is that the educational establishment will use the courts, and they're testing what they're able to do. Can they hit the brakes on this movement for school choice? And so far, I think school choice is maintaining its momentum.
Yeah, Liam, you travel the country as an ambassador for the Herzog Foundation, and I know your audiences are primarily people that are seeking alternatives to public education, but I really do wonder politically. Teachers' unions battle school choice in court. I think parents and just average citizens are warming to school choice, not backing away from it. I wonder, is this political suicide for teachers' unions if they keep fighting this publicly?
I think as ESAs gain more experience and we start to see the results of the programs, I think that this will be political suicide in the future. As of right now, it's still very contested. It's still very novel.
Because most kids are still in public school. Most families still use public school.
Yeah, and if you look at if you look at the CSA in particular, they're capping it at 10,000 students. So it's not like you're going to see like 40% of the state's like young population enrolled in private schools. But it does like beg the question that is it wrong for those 10,000 to be enrolled in a universal school choice program? Like Michael was saying, it's like choice is a good thing.
I think we discussed this last week. It brings to mind again, at least I think we did, when President Biden went to the Philadelphia area and spoke at a primarily minority-attended school, a 5-day-a-week boarding school. It's a private institution where kids leave an unsafe school and they're housed for 5 days a week, due to the donations of others. And I just find it ironic that it was Joe Biden in that venue speaking to ostensibly parents and staff of that school who are obviously supportive of school choice, and yet Joe Biden's agenda is not.
Yeah, talking about agendas, I mean, the same people that are pushing the kinds of sexual indoctrination that we're talking about week after week are somehow afraid that if there's school choice, kids are going to get religious indoctrination. Heaven forbid that happen.
Yeah. Josh, is this ultimately, do you think, a winning issue for teachers' unions or not? As Liam said, as we were talking, overwhelmingly most people still go to public school. But is that changing? Is that your read?
Yeah, I mean, the appetite for school choice is big. I mean, polls continue to show that parents and a majority want it.
Particularly with minorities, which I think is important to people on the left.
That's right. Those who are in low income situations as well, or which generally maps onto schools that are doing less well, that aren't performing well. Those families want better options for their kids. And, growing up, and a lot of people still say this, education is sort of your ticket out, your ticket to a better life, your ticket to whatever. And I think a good education still does carry that promise. I don't see why we're not willing to offer more options that can potentially meet the needs of what I think we all realize are very different kids from very different backgrounds. And so let's not do the one-size-fits-all thing.
We talk a lot about the culture at readline.com too, and that's what I love so much about it. It goes in many different directions. And one of the things you've written about, this is a big topic, but it is an interesting one culturally, Michael, is the World Health Organization. This is an institution, and I would say right along with sort of domestic U.S. medical policy, has really come under fire since COVID. I think there's a healthy mistrust of these global organizations and even these national health organizations and their guidance for all of our health.
Yeah, I mean, it's like having a fire department that would be the last people you call in an event of a fire. Who are you going to call for the next pandemic? The WHO is not exactly Ghostbusters. They're more like the EPA guy that shut down the machine and let the ghosts out. They were late to declare an emergency. They were late to admit human-to-human spread. They bought whatever China was selling them about the virus. WHO's own panel in 2021 called the pandemic preventable and said that the WHO's response and governments around the world's response were a, quote, toxic cocktail. Now, is that who you want to call? But they're looking to expand their powers with this treaty. This one report said that the WHO should have declared a global emergency earlier than it did. The report said that adding without urgent change, the world was vulnerable to another major disease outbreak. And yet we want to look at relying on them more.
I wonder, COVID did so many things to so many institutions, from the economy to medicine to schools and education. From the health perspective, Josh, do you think that era has made people trust institutional medicine less?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, institutional trust across the board is down. It's been trending downward, and I think the pandemic accelerated that. And I think a lot of different kinds of institutions are, kind of reeling from that. But health is certainly one of them. There was already, I think, this desire for alternative medicine, beginning to be a distrust and a realization that big pharma controls a lot of how we think about health. They control a lot of the ad spend on television, in sports. I mean, they're in all the big markets. And so I think there's probably a healthy distrust. I think in this country, I mean, we're in the show me state right now, right? And I think kind of that attitude is probably a healthy one to have. Prove it, that kind of attitude of show me, let's investigate. Is this what's best? What's really going on?
This is, again, anecdotal. My son's 19. My oldest son is 19. And he has, just through his consumption of various online venues, Liam, I'll ask you as a younger man, he has a really healthy mistrust of medicine generally. Not that he's not anti-doctor, but he's not a pill-popping kid. Like he generally errs on the side of, I can handle it naturally. My immune system can handle it naturally. That's not something I taught him. That's just something he picked up. I wonder, do young people gravitate toward mistrusting medicine, do you think, or not?
I'd say definitely not. I think there's a lot of literature recently that's starting to uncover this, but my generation, to various extents, is coddled with like this idea of that safety is the most important thing. Like the issue of safetyism, even irrationally so, is an issue, and you see that through over-medication, being overdiagnosed.
Oh, so you say young people are leaning into medicines right now?
I definitely would say so.
Yeah.
Personally, I haven't, but I know a lot of people who have, and sometimes there are legitimate reasons why you should, but kind of that question, like you were saying, is like, how much should I trust these institutions? That's not really at the forefront of how people think.
Fascinating, particularly given the week of Dr. Fauci's testimony on Capitol Hill, which has been something to watch. Moving to, in fact, Missouri, Josh, and the state auditor of Missouri, this has been something that's going on for a while now, auditing the behavior and the actions of school districts. It doesn't seem like that should be that novel, but I don't know that I've ever heard of it until I heard the Missouri auditor looking into the business of school boards and districts. Yeah,
that's right. Scott Fitzpatrick, the auditor of Missouri, said he ran on this issue, that one of the promises he made was that he would look into school districts, that he'd be responsive to Missouri citizens when they call for audits. And so he's looking specifically at the Independent School District, which is a suburb of Kansas City, but also saying that it will be part of a larger practice of auditing school districts. I mean, states tend to spend about half their budgets on schools, and so the state has an obligation, I think, just to look at how the money's being used. And so it's one more form of accountability for voters who vote. They have a chance to vote for the school boards. They're taxpayers, but also, as state taxpayers, it's one more level of accountability.
It is interesting, Michael. I can't honestly say, as I was growing up and paying, or once I was a homeowner and paying taxes in my community, I don't know that I ever really thought about what school districts were spending, and I probably should have.
Yeah, I mean, especially now, we're seeing information that indicates that administration spending on administrators has far outpaced student enrollment. But I think that rustling sound you hear is board members and bureaucrats rushing to look up the word accountability. We're trying to find out what that means. I think we need to find out what that means. Private education, whatever source it is, whether it be Christian schools or private schools or homeschooling, is under a microscope now because of the school choice movement. Why not public districts? And in this particular case, the auditor is looking at a district in the Kansas City area that has just gone to a 4-day week. And so it's just a great opportunity to find out, does that make sense fiscally? It's not sinister to ask and to look into how money's being spent. It's just not.
Liam, the Florida Board of Education, all things Florida, it's a little different than everybody else. Ron DeSantis, and so much of the way they govern themselves down there is different than a lot of the other politics that we talk about on the show. Florida's Board of Education has decided to get rid of gender, to be really, really clear, and say we're going to start using the word sex instead of gender. Do you like it?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good thing. It appears like a small change, but it's actually incredibly significant, because instead of gender being codified, which is associated with gender identity, which these days is interpreted as being fluid, I can identify as the other gender, and that would make me eligible for like women's sports. They're saying, nope, none of that. Now we're going to change the word gender with sex. And the intent behind that was for the state of Florida to protect women's sports. The Florida Commissioner of Education in talking about this policy change, say it was in reaction to harmful federal regulations. And we see that throughout like Joe Biden's Title IX rules and a lot of just the positions he's taken on women's sports. There's definitely been a need for states to do something like this.
It's been interesting to watch Florida. I don't know if it's because exclusively of Ron DeSantis' leadership. I don't know if it's the politics of Florida generally, but when you're talking about a board of education at a state level, you often will find that even if it's a red state, the board of education is not necessarily run by conservatives often, but it seems that's the case in Florida.
Yeah, and they have, I mean, I think one thing you see there is strong leadership from a governor who's willing to promote legislative priorities. The lawmakers pass laws. So, the state passed the Fairness in Women's Sports Act, and that kind of gave, that puts a law in the books that then, helps these boards come up with policies that match the state's law. This particular board, I can't remember, but I think there may have been some members unseated or else replaced one way or the other. And so, sometimes as policies change, you'll see a shift in the guard, who's going to come in and start to enforce the policies now that are on the books.
Michael Ryan, the people of Florida don't seem to object to this. I mean, we've seen it time and again. Everyone said DeSantis shouldn't go to war with Disney. He did, and it seems like Disney ultimately backed down. It seems this issue that we talk about almost every week, Florida says we're not tolerating it, and no one seems to object down there.
Well, I think it's safe to say this is not a Mickey Mouse governor that you have in Florida. And this is all in response to Biden's dilation of Title IX sex discrimination to include gender identity. It's legally questionable. The courts are going to be answering this. But ultimately, the question is, who should decide this? Should it be a federal bureaucracy, such as Biden's Department of Education, or the Department of Justice for that matter, or should it be state and local officials who are accountable to parents? Mm-hmm. I don't think it's reckless to say it ought to be in parents' hands. There are safety, privacy, equity issues, not to mention moral issues involved when you have, people crossing the locker room to the other locker room. We need to resolve those issues in favor of the biological girls, which, as you know, we used to call girls.
Yeah, just when you thought it couldn't get nuttier, when I heard the term doctors assigning gender at birth, that's when I knew we'd gone completely off the rails, because now you're just dealing in a fluidity of truth. I mean, if there's no such thing as gender at all, it's just something, a child is born and a doctor assigns a gender. If that becomes common parlance, Josh, what is truth? I mean, it really starts to become a philosophical explosion.
And there, I think, is a relationship between the shift in culture philosophically that's taken, 70 years and these issues. People for decades were warning about what happens when a society kind of loses its sense of objectivity or its value of objective truth, and standards start to shift, and then it's kind of anything goes. And certainly with gender, the progressive ideology is that it's my truth, your truth. It's how I feel at the moment. And it's interesting that we elevate that people are identifying with so much with their sexuality. I mean, it feels like the tail's wagging the dog here, mm-hmm. But then you can't question it because it's their truth. And so, there are some deep philosophical things going on there.
Fascinating, Michael.
Well, yeah, I just want to say, I think it's interesting that when the latest Supreme Court justice was nominated and couldn't say what a woman is, couldn't define a woman, the media defended that. But then, in the same breath, heralded the first black woman on the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah, the height of irony. Josh, the story of I know this is not the first one. It might even be the same one, but I'm sure it's not the only story like it in the country. Adoptive parents maybe losing the ability to foster a child simply because they will not affirm this gender craziness that we were just talking about. I feel like this is not the first time you've reported a story like this at the Lion.
That's right. We're seeing a similar story play out in different states. This one is in Vermont, where a Christian couple, was denied their foster license. They were basically given an ultimatum: either you can close it out yourself, or we're going to have to close it for you. Now, what happened was they were asked would they be willing to foster a transgender child, and their answer was along the lines of, well, we'd be willing to take one in, but we're not going to use the pronouns, we're not going to facilitate gender transition. I think they kind of disagreed maybe with the notion or the premise, and that's when they were told allegedly by the state, okay, that's, you're denied. And so they are getting some help from the Center for American Liberty, which has issued a demand letter. And as far as I know, that's kind of where it's at right now.
This reminds me of the abortifacient debate a while ago and the Little Sisters of the Poor, Michael. It's kind of a cousin story, zeroing in on Christian entities or individuals who adhere to their faith, don't want to discuss abortifacients or don't want to discuss gender transition, but taking kids who need homes, foster homes, from perfectly good families and care because of a political agenda.
Yeah, and this couple was perfectly willing to foster a gender dysphoric child, but just not participate in or facilitate the transitioning. This is taking thought police to the point of thought judges and juries. When this couple is being punished for just expressing an opinion, and then they don't like the opinion, and so they're denying a license to foster care based upon what this couple might do, which is not go along with whatever the child wants.
Yeah. And eventually we're going to have to get to a place, Liam, where we say it is not hateful to not affirm what you feel.
Yeah, exactly. Because the most important people in the story are the children that this foster family might potentially care for. Because really what this is state-mandated parenting saying you have to do this a certain way, when in reality this is just ideological capture. And children are the ones who are being harmed by this, because if you look at studies and statistics that are happening, the majority of kids who suffer from gender dysphoria have a comorbidity, either clinical depression or some eating disorder, which is usually because of some trauma in the past. So what you're effectively saying is the only way to care for this child is to affirm the gender dysphoria, which is the result of something else that we're not going to treat, we're just going to ignore, and we're going to punish the family for actually wanting to care holistically about the child. It's not a recipe for success, and children are the ones who are going to be harmed.
Great discussion, great stories again this week at readlion.com. But before we wrap, we always like to ask the panel if they have a particular story at readlion.com that they'd like to call your attention to. So we start with Michael. Your favorite of the week?
No, not really.
No, nothing.
Okay, yeah,
None.
no,
You got zip.
I do. It's by one of our best reporters, Jillian Schneider. The headline is "Public Schools Weren't Designed to Raise Our Children." Bob Vanderplatz recalls how Iowa paved the way for universal school choice. Someday, in the not too distant future, we're going to look back on the fight for school choice, and we're going to think it was easy, and we're going to forget how hard it was.
Yeah, and Iowa, Kim Reynolds, that story is remarkable. I mean, that was not just a two-party fight. That was a fight inside one party, the Republican Party, interestingly, in Iowa. Yeah, good one. Liam?
Yeah, there's a story that was published last week. It was about NBA player Al Horford, and it was just discussing how his faith keeps him and carries him, and just what it was like being a person of faith in the NBA, which personally I really, I really look up to that.
Yeah.
And I'm also a huge NBA fan, and I'm also from Boston, so go Celtics in the finals.
A little biased there.
Just
All right.
a little bit.
Very
Yeah.
cool. And Josh?
Well, we just published an article. I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's on my mind. In Missouri, there was an appeals court that overturned a jury verdict. Or actually, they reinstated a jury verdict. The short of it is that a transgender student sued his school, Blue Springs School District, in 2015, was awarded $4 million because they wouldn't let the biological male, who then identified as a female, use the women's facilities. Well, the appeals court in Missouri has just reinstated that award, and so it's kind of been a volley back and forth, but it's the important thing here is that the same Supreme Court case, Bostock, which the Biden administration is using to push Title IX, was used in this case. And so, I think it's just a reminder to be watching this play out in the courts, and it's important. It's such an important issue, and we'll kind of have to see where it goes.
Yeah, no doubt. It's ongoing, and it will continue to be covered here at The Lion, readlion.com. And that wraps it up for this week. I hope you'll keep up to date on all the latest news. Every day, lots being published at readlion.com. For all of us at The Lion, thanks for downloading the show, and we'll see you next time.